Ellis Island, but then if they weren't staying here in New York, they would be taken to a train station. And the train station is up here. Up on the right now, there's a little red brick Victorian building up there. And that's the Central Railroad of New Jersey terminal. And it's there they would catch trains that would take them out to the rest of America to begin their life, their new life here. And today, so many people came through this area that today in 2012, 40% of the entire population of the U.S. has at least one relative that came through here between 1892 and 1924. Now, there's usually always somebody on the boat. I mean, a lot of you are visitors today, but I have some ladies here. Any of you have a relative? I see two of them right here. So it always happens because so many today. Now, the people who came through here, they went through Ellis Island first. Now, you know, Ellis Island was not for everybody. This was not, everybody who came to this country did not have to go through immigration inspection. It was only the poor people that had to go through immigration inspection. It was the people who had very little. They traveled what was called third class or steerage on the boats. But the people who were first or second class passengers on those boats, the thinking was if you had that much money, if you could afford that, then you were okay to enter the country because you would not be a financial burden on society. You would be able to take care of yourself. So the poor, the very poor, these were people who sacrificed everything. They sold most of their belongings to get on the boat to come here. And basically whatever they had left would fit like in one small suitcase. This is how they arrived. So many of them arrived this way. And they would go through immigration inspection, and it could be quite an ordeal. It could be a very long ordeal. You could, if there were health problems or legal problems or financial problems, you could be delayed in entering the U.S. by days, weeks, or even months, and you would have to stay on Ellis Island. You would have to stay in dormitories that they had canvas cots stacked one on top of the other while your fate was decided. And if you were turned away, you were sent back. You were put right back on the ship to be taken back, and you would have nothing left. I mean, these people, so it was a real tragedy to be denied entrance. Now, only about 2% of the people who came through Ellis Island were ever turned away, and it was mostly because there was contagious diseases that there was no known cure for. One of the diseases was called trachoma, which caused blindness. There was a really awful inspection they would do for that, where they'd take a button hook and turn back the eyelids. It was very, very painful for them. And also, if just because of language barriers, you could be turned away because they would ask you questions, and if you answered them the wrong way, you could be sent back. And there were so many different languages, and very often, so it would take sometimes a long time to straighten that out. That's why we have so many immigration societies, immigration aid societies. They sprung up to help the people from the different countries, the people who were already here, created these societies to be advocates for the people here because of language barriers and everything else. And what's interesting is so many of the people who came to Ellis Island, they were the very, very poor, and yet so many, they came here hoping to start a new life, and many of them actually founded businesses that today are Fortune 500 companies. And it's an amazing piece of U.S. history. And if you're really interested in this and you'd like to know more, I suggest that you come out here to Ellis Island. It's a museum today, and it tells this incredible story. There's so much to see. They can actually take you through you can walk through the process and learn what these people went through. You'll see a statue of the very first person who came through Ellis Island on opening day. It opened January 1st, 1892. And the very first person to come through the gates over here was Annie Moore. She was a young girl from Cork Island. She came on the SS Nevada with her two brothers, and they were joining her parents who arrived a few years earlier, and she was given a $10 gold coin. And there's actually a statue of Annie Moore over in Ireland, but there's also one here at Ellis Island. And in fact, we still have descendants of Annie Moore living in New York City today. So this is Ellis Island up here now. Coming up in front of us, the building with the four pointed towers you see up here. This is the main terminal building, and this is where the immigration inspections happened and where the hearings were held. The dormitories and the hospital rooms and things like that are on the other side of the island, and we'll see that as we pass the island as well. And this building that you see here, the main terminal building, this is new. And I say new by, it's 1900. The original building from 1892 burned to the ground in 1897. So this is actually the second building, and it's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to find immigration papers prior to about 1900, because a lot of the records were destroyed in that fire, because this was the main immigration station for the federal government's immigration policy. So here's Ellis Island now, and then out beyond it is the Statue of Liberty. There she is, facing the Atlantic Ocean, ready to greet all those new arrivals. She was placed there. She was placed there at the behest of the artist who created the statue. Now, the Statue of Liberty was a gift from the people of France to the United States to celebrate it was supposed to be originally for the 100th anniversary of the American Revolution, but it got here a lot later. They missed that by a bunch of years. But she was created by a French sculptor named Frederick Auguste Bertholdet. And when he surveyed the New York City harbor when they were going to give us the statue, he picked this island that she stands on, and he said, put this statue right here. If you don't put the statue here, you cannot have it. And the reason for that is because he wanted the statue to be facing Europe. She's looking out where she stands, she's looking right across the Atlantic Ocean. And he did that for a specific reason. And the reason he did that is because when he created the statue, during that era, in the 1870s, 1880s, there were almost no republics in Europe. All European countries were ruled by royal families and monarchs and czars. And like many of the French of that era, he believed that the republic represented the future of mankind. And so he named the statue Liberty Enlightening the World. That's her name. Statue of Liberty is actually a nickname. And he said he wanted her to face Europe. If you hold two pennies together between your fingers, that's the thickness of the copper. And it was planned. The copper turns green over time in the salt air. It's called oxidation. And they planned it that way because they thought the color would look good with the ocean and the sky and everything else around you. So anyway, because the copper is so thin, there's a skeletal support structure underneath the copper that was created by the French engineer Alexander Gustave Eiffel, the gentleman responsible for the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The statue is on a pedestal that was created by the American architect Richard Morris Hunt, and the pedestal sits on top of a fort from the War of 1812 known as Fort Wood. And the statue arrived here in New York in 1884, so they missed the 100th anniversary of the Revolution. 1884, the statue arrived here, and it came in 214 crates and a long list of directions so that we could put it together ourselves out here in the harbor. And to do that, we had to raise some money. We had to raise a lot of money, and nobody wanted to give to the statue. And it was really embarrassing because at about a year, they were still short over $100,000 to put the statue together. And so they were going to send the statue back to France. They're going to pack it all up and send it back to France. But then Joseph Pulitzer, founder of the Pulitzer Prize, he decided to try and promote the fundraising. And what he said is he had a newspaper called the New York World, and he promised that he would put the name of every single person who gave to the statue on the front page of his newspaper. Even if they only gave a single penny, no matter how small the donation was, they'd get their name on the front page of the newspaper. And 3 months after announcing this, we had raised the $103,000 needed to finish putting the statue here where she stands today. Now the statue has gone through a lot of work. In the 1980s we had to do a head-to-toe restoration on the statue. At that time we discovered that Mr. Bertholdet, when he had originally planned the statue, he wanted to make the torch the way you see it today. The flame is gilded in gold and they light it with light from outside that reflects the light. But he had run out of money, and so he opted for a cheaper alternative, which was to make the flame out of glass and put electric light within. But we had a lot more money when we did the restoration, so we went back to Mr. Bertholdet's original plan. So this torch that you see here is actually from the 1980s. The original glass torch is on display in the base of the statue. There's a museum in the base, and you can see the original torch there. However, you cannot see that right now because the statue is not open to the public. They closed the statue this past October, as this is a planned closure because they needed to do some work on the interior. They had to improve the emergency exits and do a couple of other things, so that it's going to take about a year. So it's closed right now. You can still come out. You can take the boat from Battery Park and visit the Statue of Liberty. And you can also still go inside Ellis Island, but you cannot go into the statue itself, and neither the statue nor the base of it, the museum. And now you'll see people out here on the island. You see all these people down here at the base of the statue. And what these people are trying to do right now is
여기.
I was waiting for you to come upstairs.
because it gets too cold.
No.
이것 때문에 겁이 안 나와.
좀 바깥에서 찍어야 돼.
바깥에서 찍어야지.
Dictates the height of all the ships that come through here. The central span is about 4,620 feet, and in the summertime, the bridge is actually 12 feet lower than it is in the winter because of the expansion and contraction of the metal, according to the temperature. That bridge is where the New York City Marathon begins every November. This past November, we had 47,000 runners on that bridge. The right side of the bridge is Staten Island, and the left side is Brooklyn. Now, people often ask me, I get asked all the time, why do they call New York City the Big Apple? And no one knows. There's about a dozen different legends as to why it happened and why it's called that, but nobody knows if any of those legends are true. I'll tell you the three most common. One is that they said that during the Great Depression, Wall Street workers who were thrown out of work by the collapse of the stock market used to sell apples from their briefcases to make money, and that became the Big Apple. Another legend is that it was jockeys in the horse racing industry at the racetracks, because there was a racetrack near the city and there was a big financial prize for the race, and the jockeys called that financial prize the Big Apple, and that's how it happened. And a third one is that it was actually jazz musicians traveling the country, and the jazz musicians used to say if you got a gig in New York City, you would pick the Big Apple. But nobody knows whether any of those are true. The legislature set aside the island for the comfort and accommodation of His Majesty's governors. And over the years, right here, another fort called Castle William. But it's most famous in the 20th century as the largest Coast Guard station in the United States. This was our Coast Guard station for many years. The Coast Guard moved out a few years ago and they gave the island back to the city. And the city operates the island today as a park. It is only open from the months of May to October, but you can take the free ferry boat over here to visit it. There's no cars. It's a wonderful retreat from the hot, crowded city on a summer day. But we almost lost the entire Revolutionary War. It almost ended right here in August of 1776 because George Washington and the American troops, they were badly outnumbered by the British. And they had to retreat, and the British almost captured Washington during that. And if they had, we're going to go out into the harbor. We're going to kind of cruise around Manhattan now, and we're going to have a wonderful view of the Statue of Liberty. You're going to get some great photos. When we get out there, everybody be calm because we're going to stop the boat right in front of the statue. So you'll be able to move around and get as many pictures as you want, so no rushing. Everybody be cool, okay? Our captain today, his name is Adonis, and we have Mehedi and Chris as our crew members, and we have a full bar in the back. Sandra has the bar. She's a great bartender, and she's got cool drinks and hot drinks and souvenirs and snacks, so if you need anything at all, you can see Sandra in the back, okay? Now, we're on the East River. Right now, this is the East River, and we're along, we've just left Manhattan Island, and we're going to go around the tip of Manhattan over to the Hudson River. That's up to about the World Trade Center, and then go over and out to the harbor itself. Now we're going to pass Wall Street in just a minute over here on our right side. You see the white brick building right here. Next to the white brick building, there's a black glass building with white vertical stripes. In between those two buildings, that is Wall Street. Wall Street got its name because in 1653, the Dutch, who were here in New Amsterdam, they built a wooden wall right here. This was the northern edge of the city. And the wall was to protect them because they thought that the British up in the Connecticut area were going to try to invade, because this was during the First Anglo-Dutch War. Oh, someone just boosted the volume a little bit. And anyway, there's Wall Street right in there. And this is within walking distance of the seaport. If anybody, most of you are with groups, I know that, but hopefully they'll take you over to see Wall Street. It's really quite something. You see the New York Stock Exchange. You can see where George Washington took his oath of office as our first president, because New York was the first capital of the U.S. from 1789 to 1790. We were the first capital of the U.S. So we're just passing Wall Street, and we're moving downtown. And over here, coming up ahead of us, there's a heliport. It's the largest heliport in New York City. And there's a big helicopter sitting out there on the heliport right now. And this is where President Obama lands when he comes to visit us. President Obama comes in three or more, sometimes it's more than three, but several helicopters, and nobody knows which helicopter the president is in until he steps out of it at the heliport. And we do this for all dignitaries, any heads of state, the Pope or the Queen, anybody who comes to visit New York. We send them over to Manhattan from the airport with helicopters. And that's because we don't want them to sit in city traffic trying to get into the city. It's very difficult. If you've ever come from the airport into Manhattan, it can be very difficult. So dignitaries get to come over by helicopter, and they land up here. They're right here. And then they make big traffic jams here in Manhattan for us. Now, Manhattan Island is about 12 miles long. The island of Manhattan is only about 12 miles long. And at its widest part, it's about 2.5 miles wide. And our population today, there's about 1.6 million people that call Manhattan home. And then each workday, another about 1.5 million come in here, they commute in here to work. So our population goes to about 3 million, a little over 3 million. And then each week we get a lot of visitors. Sometimes we get more than 1 million visitors a week here in New York City. So we get about 4 million or so on the island of Manhattan. We make it all work somehow because we're New Yorkers, you know. And actually it's not so bad. It used to be more crowded, you know, in the beginning of the 1900s, the early part of the 20th century, when there was so much immigration happening here. We had over 2 million people living on the island of Manhattan at the time. So it's a lot less, even though the buildings are a lot taller today, it's a lot less because we live in more rooms. We take up a little more space, I guess. A lot of the people that came here in the beginning of the 20th century, they lived in small tenement apartments, 10 to a room sometimes. So, you know, this we've got a little more elbow room now. Now, pulling out in front of us, there's a white boat that's just pulling out in front of us here. This is why we've slowed up. And it just left this ferry terminal here where you see the pink arches, this yellow building with the pink arches. This ferry terminal is from 1909. It's called Battery Maritime Terminal. And this boat, this is the ferry boat that goes to and from Governor's Island. And it's a free ferry boat. You do get some things for free in New York. One of them is a ferry ride here from Lower Manhattan. Actually, there's 2 ferry rides here from Lower Manhattan, and they're both free because the other one is next to the Battery Maritime Terminal. We have South Ferry Terminal, and right there, and that big orange boat that's out there now, down by the going by the Statue of Liberty, right near the Statue of Liberty down there, that's the Staten Island ferry boat. That's also a free ferry boat. And 65,000 people a day rely on that boat. They cross the harbor to get to Manhattan. And Staten Island is part of New York City. Most people, when they come here the first time, they spend most of their time on Manhattan Island because it's where a lot of the landmarks are. But people who return visitors, or some people who are just interested more in really historic sites, might take the boat out to Staten Island because there's a lot of history, and there's 5 areas that make up New York City. We have Manhattan Island, we have Staten Island, we have Brooklyn, we have Queens, we have the Bronx, and even the Queens and Brooklyn are on islands. The only part of New York City that's not on an island is the Bronx. The Bronx is mainland USA. We are a city made up of islands. Very much like Venice is made up of islands. We kind of think of ourselves as the Venice of North America. I know a lot of people don't buy that, but we can make it work if we want to here in New York because we're New Yorkers. So here's South Ferry Terminal. And this is the southern tip of Manhattan right now, and we're going to head on to the Hudson River. Now, the Hudson River is named after a British explorer, Henry Hudson. He discovered this area in 1609 while working for the Dutch West India Company. And he thought he had found a shortcut to trade with Asia. What he really thought when he saw this river is that he thought he was going to be able to, it was so big, he thought he would be able to sail right up the river over the North Pole and down into China. That's what he thought would happen. But the river is only 315 miles long, so it didn't really work. But the Dutch came back in 1624. They dropped off some settlers on Governor's Island. Those settlers stayed on the island for about a year, and then they moved across